The Bears did not get Jonas Aidoo, and with just hours remaining in the transfer portal's opening, are they out of options? This is Locked On Baylor.
You are Locked On Baylor, your daily podcast on the Baylor Bears, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome to another episode of Locked On Baylor, brought to you by Monopoly Go. I am your host, Cam Stewart of ESPN Central Texas. Thank you for making it your first listen today and every day. I'm in a new studio. If you're watching on YouTube, you'll learn more about this hopefully next week. But today's episode, we are looking at the downfall of the Jonas Aidoo loss for the Baylor Bears and how far that sets them back and whether it could mean even a change in style offensively in this next season. I know I've talked about that a few times this offseason, but this could push them towards that. And I did want to revisit the spring game, in quotations, a little bit, and how we might see more of that going forward, not just from Baylor. I think that's an interesting thing to look at. And also, we're about to kind of close out the football transfer portal here in the next few days. And we're going to look at where Baylor stands in that standpoint right now. And honestly, I don't think they're in a bad position. All of that coming up on today's show. But first, we got the news Tuesday night that Jonas Aidoo, the all SEC center who Baylor was targeting to be their starting number 5, ends up picking Arkansas instead. He visited Fayetteville over the weekend, and instead of rounding out Baylor's starting 5, what he has done is rounded out John Calipari's first starting 5 for his tenure as the Hogs head coach. And that, I don't want to, it's not the end of the world, but it is about the worst news you could have gotten as a Baylor fan at this point. And really, that obviously extends into the end of last week with Alvin Brooks III taking the job at Kentucky. Again, one of those where you're like, boy, it doesn't sink the program or anything, but boy, that's not what you wanted to see. That's not what you wanted as a Baylor fan. And I think this Jonas Aidoo miss could hurt even more in terms of this 2024-25 season. Because what you were going to get in Jonas Aidoo is something so rare in the transfer portal, especially for a school like Baylor. And it is to grab an all-conference kind of player, a guy who came pretty close to averaging a double-double, a guy who is a perfect fit for what you need this year in your starting lineup, and a guy who has eligibility left. We can say that about a couple of guys, the point guards mainly, the last couple of years for Baylor. I think of James Akinjo. I think of Ray J. Dennis, and you're like, boy, those guys were perfect fits, right? They were exactly what Baylor needed. They were ones that you signed on the dotted line and knew their names were going to be announced in the starting lineup the next year, but they came with just 1 year. And that's pretty common in college basketball, in a sport where guys can leave after just one season. And I don't know if it happens more often than football, but it's something that you kind of expect when a big name's coming in the portal. You're like, oh, he's probably going to be here 1 year. In fact, you look at the other guy Baylor added in the portal and Jeremy Roach, and it's the same thing. And you love that he brings, obviously, a bunch of experience with him coming from Duke, but he doesn't have more than 1 year of eligibility, which is fine. But with Aidoo, you were having the best of both worlds. You were bringing in a guy with experience, production at a high level, and time to spare with you and on your team. But that's not the case. And it is time to move on. Arkansas got their guy. Baylor did not. And it is a quick turnaround time because as this episode goes out Wednesday, and I hope I'll have to make an addendum to it, the transfer portal closes at midnight. And you might see some announcements made, later on because of paperwork for a day or two, but that's it, man. It ends tonight as you're listening to this. And the pickings are very slim for the Bears. I kind of went over this in the emergency Locked On Baylor episode to talk about just the raw reaction of Aidoo's commitment. You you just don't have a lot of options anymore. In fact, the guy whose name is escaping me from Middle Tennessee, who was another option to be your starting center, he's already off the board too. And looking at the wing position, Igor Milicic is off the board. You still got to fill that position, by the way, on the wing. We talk about center, and that's most pressing. And I do love Jason Asamoah coming in, and he's a pretty good shooter as well. You do need someone else that position. You need depth at that position. You lost two guys at the wing, and that is Jalen Bridges and Caleb Lohner. And losing a guy who could, give you some time is not necessarily a wing, but a kind of a bigger guard in a 3-guard set, and that is Miro Little. You don't have him anymore either. So Baylor's got some spots open. And as we look at it, this is not is the cupboard is bare. The cupboard is bare. In fact, I look at these on the 24/7 and the on 3, top 25 guys at the position, and 23 out of 25 of them are done. They've already made their commitments. Obviously, I mean, we're out of time here. In fact, the only one that I've seen on here that is not or has not committed, and now I'm losing the name, of course, is Baba Miller. And that's, 22, 23 spots down. He's from Florida State, and he's got a couple years of eligibility. He's 6'11". He's got to fill out the body a little bit more. He's only just over 200 pounds. And so a nice guy who, put up some nice numbers as a youngster at Florida State this year. And that was not a good year for the Seminoles, but he, got some playing time, averaged 8 and 5, not an efficient scorer at 45% from the field as someone shooting down low, but someone who give you some time. He's played in the ACC, but then again, he's done his visits, and Baylor was not on them. Baylor probably hasn't even shown interest. You're looking at Wake Forest and looking at FAU, so maybe it is a guy who would fit this style of offense because John Jacobs likes him, but you're out of time. You're out of time. And again, I said this on the emergency show. I do have trust in Scott Drew. Don't get me wrong. I do. But I do wonder about this situation. And basically, he's got two heavy rotation spots to fill, a second wing and a starting center. And we're on the final day. And we still have not heard who that is going to be at the time of recording. And again, I hope I can make another emergency pod to talk about, someone committing. But the one thing to remember in this, and I said this on the emergency pod as well, Baylor was able to win a national championship without a real offensive threat at center. And, Flo Thamba wasn't going to give you much offensively, and honestly didn't give you a lot in the rebounding department in 2021 either. Did play some good isolation defense, but you don't need an all-league guy to be successful. That is a bit of a stretch because that team is the best Baylor team ever by far in 2021. And you had close to an all-conference guy at center the year before in Freddie Gillespie. But there is a blueprint to win at Baylor without that. But make no mistake about it. I mean, missing Jonas Aidoo, that can't be taken lightly. That is a big miss for this Baylor team. And honestly, I'm searching for answers as well to see how they move on and what direction they go. Today's episode of Locked On Baylor is brought to you by FanDuel. Of course, this is a great time of year for you, the sports fan, okay? It is winner take all time in the NBA, in the NHL, and FanDuel is giving you a shot to bring home a big win of your own. Because right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $150. Bet on spreads, money lines, player props, so much more. Just visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and make every playoff shot count. That's FanDuel.com/lockedon. FanDuel, that is, of course, America's #1 sportsbook. Over to the football side of things, I know this is delayed, and we're talking about the spring finale, not a spring game for Baylor, and trying to make sense of all of that and like the Jonas Aidoo situation moving forward and seeing if that will be a trend for Baylor. Because from what we heard from Dave Aranda, he didn't say it outright, but I think that is going to be a trend going forward. And I, of course, was on here talking about how I hated that there was no spring game from a fan's perspective. I was trying to make sense of it from, the coaching staff, program's perspective. And Dave did give an answer, not a surprising answer, after the spring finale on why it was that they decided to go in that direction. There was one facet of it that did kind of take me off guard, and I do want to play that answer because I think it will be the blueprint for other teams going forward.
Obviously, the weather was an issue today, but what went into that decision to switch from scrimmage to practice, and how beneficial was the structure?
No, appreciate that. Yeah, I think we had an injury in last year in the spring game, so that was number one. Number two would be, I know for us, we if the games are on TV, we watch them, we break them down. And then we're looking at players that could possibly be in the portal off of it. And then I think third would be, it's a new defense, it's a new offense. And the better that's kept under wraps, the longer it's kept under wraps, probably the stronger chance we have right out the gate. And so I think those three things were at the forefront of that.
Yeah, so kind of the things we could guess on there, right? Obviously, the weather at the end of the day became a great crutch for them. It was raining and lightning all day, but the other ones being, we didn't want to put anything on tape. That is something that Gary Patterson kind of banged the drum at TCU for years. He didn't even want people coming to the practice, because what you put on film, and we saw that with spring games, ESPN Plus and everything, what you put on film is what other teams are going to look at. The other one that he talked about, which is kind of interesting, not funny, but interesting, is he talked about a guy getting hurt in the spring game last year. And I believe that was Jackie Marshall. I don't know if that was the spring game proper or just before. So it's kind of funny to think that, like, Jackie Marshall, who I think is going to be a pretty good player for the Bears, but by no means like an All-American type, could be setting a trend for this program going forward, and in turn, other programs going forward. But the last part he had mentioned, other than the film and other than the injury, was the transfer portal. And I had heard someone in the know talk about that when they made the decision to move the spring game off the broadcast and make it a spring practice. I think it's a good point. I think it's a real good point that, the transfer portal opens the Monday after most spring games. Obviously teams will do second or third week or fourth week in April, but this being the third week right in the middle, the portal opens right afterwards. And we know how crazy this portal is. So, it's not a far-fetched concept to have wide receiver 3 catch 2 50-yard bombs for touchdowns in the spring game, or running back 3 rip off a couple of 40, 50-yard runs in the spring game and say, I didn't play a lot last year, but now I'm on tape and I'm going to go find somewhere that's going to play me and pay me, of course. And I don't think that's crazy. I wish I could point a concrete example of when that's happened, but that in today's college football world is not out of the realm of possibility. In fact, and this is not a perfect example because this guy did play, but Malik Murphy played a game and a half for UT last year and had some good suitors in the transfer portal, not the least of which being the Baylor Bears, trying to bring him in for a visit. But he ends up going to Duke, which is a good steady ACC program right now. And I'll guarantee, they liked the game tape, but just as much, they liked some of the 50, 60-yard ropes he was throwing in Texas's spring game last year that went viral, that popped up all over the place. These spring games do matter for guys looking at the portal and for coaches looking into the portal. And so I don't think it's unfair at all for a coaching staff to say, this game doesn't mean anything. We're learning more about our guys from practice anyway. Why put that on tape? why risk losing an impact player on our team because of a barely 11 on 11, barely tackled game? So yeah, the injuries play a part of it. The tape plays a part of it. And obviously, tape's looking with an eye towards playing them in a game, but also the tape for the transfer portal. And because of that, I think we are going to see more teams do this. In fact, I wouldn't be surprised at all if spring games are a thing of the past within 4 or 5 years. Because you look at the schools or the programs that really play up the spring game, right? And that I'm thinking of the big boys, right? Ohio State, Alabama, Auburn, these big programs, Michigan, USC, even. Well, USC maybe not the best example here, but it's great for these guys, Nebraska, because they'll fill up the stadium. They'll have 90, 100,000 people there to watch them at the spring game, and that is just a bona fide juggernaut of excitement for your fan base and to show off to the world that, hey, we are bigger than everybody else. Look how much they care about us, right? But I would say on the flip side, if Ohio State did a practice the way Baylor did, but opened it up to the fans, guess what? You're still going to fill the stadium. It's Buckeye football, man. You're still going to fill the stadium. Baylor wasn't going to fill the stadium anyway. They weren't going to fill McLean. You have maybe a couple thousand people there, and it's a nice day out. Guess what? You're going to do the same thing next year when it's a practice at McLean Stadium. It's going to be the same thing. Does it stink? Kind of, yeah. And I stick by that. I think it's much easier for fans to follow a game, even if it's weird spring game rules rather than just a practice. But if you're going out there to see a meaningless football game at the end of spring practice, then you're going to go out there to see a quote unquote meaningless practice at the end of spring practice. You know what I mean? So it's not going to make a difference, I don't think, for any of these programs to move to a practice rather than a game. Sure, there's a bunch of fan excitement of seeing it in a game setting and being able to follow it a little bit better. But at the end of the day, that's not going to matter. And so I think a lot of other teams, if not all the other teams, within the next few years are going to say, why are we doing this? I had my tight end blow out his knee last year in a meaningless spring game. If he does it in a practice, it still stinks. It's the same result, but we're learning more from practice than we are a televised spring game. And I think every coach will tell you that. So I would not be surprised at all to see more teams going in that direction. Does it stink for the fans? Sure. But you're still going to be out there seeing your team and doing that. In fact, one of the teams that is not far away from Baylor in terms of they play in the same conference that has not done this the last couple of years, the Kansas State Wildcats. They haven't done a spring game the last, I think, 3 seasons under Chris Kleiman. He doesn't like them. And you don't hear a thing about it. They have got a great fan base. They could bring tens of thousands of people to their spring game, and they've been quite good in the Big 12 the last couple of years. Obviously won it in 2022, but they don't do a spring game. It hadn't slowed them down quite like one bit. And Kleiman, in an article I actually read about this recently, he was saying, this was in 2023, he was like, I get why the fans like it. They want to go out there and see Deuce Vaughn out there in the spring after they watch him in the fall. But if we, trot him out there in the spring in a full contact game, they might not get to see him in the fall. These guys, some guys do get hurt in the spring game. And I just thought about that and thought, wow, here is a team that is at the top of our conference with a head coach that is well respected the nation over, and a program that's respected like that has recent success at the highest level, and they don't do spring game, and you don't hear anything about it. Hear about it from Baylor because we're in this insulated world and things are going wrong in the football program, and people want to blame somebody for it, and I get that. I do too. But I don't think it's the fault of a spring game. And I don't think that's going to do much else to excitement from the Baylor side, from the fans' perspective. You're either looking at this season with an open mind or you've already doomed it to failure. I don't think And that's fine, but I just don't think the spring game is going to change it. So that being said, we're already starting to see some well-respected coaches and programs do away with the spring game format rather and going for an open practice format instead. I think we're going to see a lot more of that as we go forward in the next few years here. All right, got to take a time out here real quick to talk to you about one of our newest and one of my favorite sponsors here on the Locked On Podcast Network. We got to pause to talk about Monopoly Go. And I know what you're saying, okay? Throw in the flag there. You've already talked about it, but there's just so much good stuff in this game. Because in Monopoly Go, you can team up with your friends for time tournaments. You're going to work together, build up each other's boards. And the more you win together, the more awesome prizes you unlock. There's so much to get, okay? Unique stickers that you can trade with your friends, complete albums, got big prizes there. You got cool new playing pieces to travel the boards with, and you've even got hilarious emojis for taunting the other friends that you're not working with when you smash their buildings or heist their vaults. Plus, Monopoly Go, it feels new and it feels exciting every day because it's constantly changing with its tournaments and challenges. A ton include their own unique mini games like digging for treasure. And there's always new timed events that help you win big, like massive multipliers for everything you win or rent frenzies. There's always something fun to discover in Monopoly Go. So get off the bench and go download it now for free on Google Play or the App Store right now. Again, that is Google Play or the App Store. All right, game back on. And the portal is madness this time of year, right? Like Dave Aranda was not just blowing smoke when he said that. The portal is wild this time of year. And you can put something on tape in the spring game and bam, that guy's gone. Baylor needed to hit the portal hard in the spring transfer window to get some starters on their team. And, we talked about it in yesterday's episode, the three guys that they were able to add in the portal. Honestly, I could see all three of those guys starting. Snacks Johnson has played in a similar system before. I guess not exactly the same. He played for Ron Roberts, but a guy with a ton of experience can fill in at somewhere in the defensive backfield, whether it's a move to safety or whether it's, some nickel, which he played for Arkansas last year. Could see that. Linus Noel. Absolutely, he could start right away. You know why? You have no other nose tackles, none, with any experience. And so he could slot in there right away. And the first thing Dave talked about in the postgame of the spring game was an edge rusher. He needed a pass rusher. Jaquez Evans, if he's healthy, which is a question mark, I guess, because he missed the last 6 games of the year, and we don't really know the extent of that injury. In fact, go try to find it. It's not easy. So if he's healthy, that's a guy who can slot in with the production numbers he had in Conference USA at Western Kentucky. That guy can absolutely slot in and be a difference maker for you right away. So to that end, Baylor's in a good position. When I look at this transfer portal thing, it's nothing that is going to, absolutely blow everyone away, but they're in a good position. You've added 3 guys that could easily start. And your subtractions are 3 receivers who combined for 19 catches in their career. RJ Martinez, who, the coaching staff really likes, but third string quarterback. And, chances are you're not going to have one of your other quarterbacks going in the portal because they don't know who the starter is. So third string quarterback and a bunch of guys who have never set foot on the field. They had a linebacker yesterday who entered the portal. I don't know. I don't know his name because I saw he played basically no snaps, not much of a needle mover. So looking at it from that point, just the additions and subtractions, you've added 3 starters. You've lost 5 or 6 or 7 guys who really didn't factor into your team at all. So again, I want to be careful in saying this because I don't want it to sound like, oh, here we go, they're going 9-3. But Baylor's offseason has been pretty big. I don't know that it even makes them a bowl team, but it is absolutely a step in the right direction. And when you look at the last couple of years for a team that has not been able to get impact players out of the portal, that's a major step up. Is it too little too late for this coaching staff? Potentially, it could be because they could be gone by the end of September. But it is a step in the right direction. And, oh, by the way, yeah, I mentioned those guys in the portal, but you also added, the Kendrick Simpkins, a guy who could also start, and probably your starting quarterback into Quan Finn in the earlier transfer portal. Bringing in Kurt Daniker on the offensive line where you really need some help, interior offensive line. A guy who is an all-conference guy at Ohio, one of the best guards in all of college football per PFF. So you bring in starter after starter after starter, and all you're subtracting are guys who, would be flattered to be called depth guys, like way down the depth chart guys. I think this offseason is a win. Now, there's no banner to be hung for that. The teams that win in the offseason don't always win in the regular season, but I got to give Baylor some credit. They've filled a lot of their holes. All of them, I don't know yet, but they filled a good amount of their holes they had at the end of last season. And I was worried because they brought so many guys back that I was worried it was going to be too much like last year's team. But at least I can say right now, in hindsight, it will be 2020 in December. But I can say right now, Baylor did a good job in this offseason, from the coaching changes to the portal additions to a play style change, all of those things. Victory so far for Baylor. And a lot of people will still say, well, they still got the same head coach. That's true. A lot of people wanted them to change the head coach. I wanted them to change the head coach. But in terms of everything else, they've taken a step in the right direction. That's all I'll say. And I hope it leads to a bowl game. I really do. Anyway, let me know what you think. Am I blowing this out of proportion? Maybe I am. Drop that down in the comments below. Where do they go with this center thing? Are you okay with them just not adding another center? Because right now you have three guys with Asamoah, 3 guys on the roster who are 6'7" and above, and only one of them has played any time at all for Baylor. So yes, that is frightening to me, but maybe it's different for you. Let me know down in the comments below and what you think about the spring game thing. It is a bummer. I get it. Is it too much of a bummer, though? Let me know down in the comments section. Be sure to get involved, like and subscribe, tap the notification bell so that you can find out whenever we are dropping these podcasts every day, both on YouTube as well as wherever you get your podcasts. We are available. Thank you for making it your first listen today and every day. We'll be back tomorrow with some more Locked On Baylor.